Morning, kids. I'm reading to you chapter 5, The Mountain, from my front yard this morning. I'm going to head to school in just a minute. My poem this morning is from a man named Lewis Carroll, who you know of because he has written Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass and a few other things, but he wrote a lot of poems too. And one of his poems kind of went like this. How doth the little crocodile improve his shining tail, and pour the waters of the Nile on every golden scale. How happily he grins, how neatly spreads his claws, and welcomes little fishes in with gently smiling jaws. Oh, Lewis, stop it. The Mountain. They had been walking beside the dry bed of the stream for hours and had left the village far behind. Looking back, Rowan could no longer see even the tall stone walls of the mill, the highest building, because the trees had screened it from view. In front of them, like a massive wall, rose the mountain. In another 2 hours, the others said they would reach it. The map showed clearly that they must begin their climb at the place where the water gushed from its underground tunnel to form the stream. There they'd rest for a while and consult the map before going on. Rowan was very tired. The bag he carried was dragging on his shoulders, and his back and his legs ached. He knew that he had to keep walking and not complain, and the others were trying to make it easy for him to keep up, but he could tell that the slow pace was irritating at least Brodda and Val. It was hard to tell how Ellis felt, because he rarely spoke at any time. Even when they passed the mill and the great wooden wheel was lying motionless in the mill race, its own channel on one side of the stream bed dry, he had said nothing. He only looked and then turned his head back toward the mountain. Rowan watched him now, striding at the head of the group. He carried his pack and the extra weight of a heavy rope, a small axe, and their supply of torches with ease. Behind him walked his sister. They were a strange, silent pair. Rowan had heard Jiller say to Strong John that it was as though they lived in a world of their own, a world inhabited only by two people. They seemed as hard and immobile as the stone walls of their mill. They were about the same age as Jiller, and Rowan had taken them for granted as he grew up. They were just a normal part of day-to-day life in the village for him, and like the other adults he had known since babyhood. But lately he'd come to realize that Val and Ellis were really unusual, and that his mother and people like Strong John and Alan thought so too. Behind Val, a head shorter but stocky and determined, tramped Brondon. Marley came next, smiling occasionally at Alan, who was swinging along beside her, whistling and singing as if he was on a country jaunt. They had put Rowan second to last, with Strong John bringing up the rear. Every now and then John would speak to him, "All well, Rowan?" He would call heartily, or, "Nearly there now, my friend." Rowan would nod and mutter an unwilling answer. He knew John didn't really care about how he felt. He was just being responsible for him. John was good-natured and agreeable to everyone. It was his way, and he had always been pleasant to Rowan. But that was different from liking. He cared for Anad. He could see that. But with Rowan, he never really relaxed. He tried too hard to be nice. You don't have to try when you really like someone. Rowan knew that. And sometimes John called him Skinny Rabbit and laughed at him for being afraid of things. John was talking to him now because of Jiller. Rowan had heard his mother say, "Take care of him," as she said goodbye to the big man before they left, and John had taken both her hands in his and said, "I will, Jiller, by my life. I promise I will bring him home to you." Remembering this, Rowan felt a flash of resentment. What right had Strong John to look at his mother like that? What right had he to hold her hands as if he were more than her dead husband's friend? It had been a shock to him, there in the market square, when he realized that John might feel something more for his mother than a simple friendship. It had been horrible to think that he might even plan on becoming her husband one day. No one could ever take his father's place, thought Rowan bitterly. No one. He stamped along, staring ahead, and John should feel responsible for this mess, he thought. It was John's teasing that had angered Sheba so that she had made Rowan the keeper of the map. It was John's fault that Rowan had been forced to become the weak, unwanted seventh member of the party. At that, Rowan's thoughts changed direction and his anger cooled. He wondered whether John and Marley had remembered Sheba's words. 7 hearts the journey make. 7 hearts. 7 ways the heart will break. Let me read that one again. 7 hearts the journey make. 7 ways the hearts will break. They had said nothing, but surely they must have thought about it, as he had, and a shiver ran down his spine. There is no way that Sheba could have known that the number of travelers would be 7 in advance, unless she really had a vision of the future as she lay there, back in her chair with her eyes half closed. And if that part of the prophecy had come true, what about all the rest? Rowan bent his head to watch the ground under his feet. He did not want to look at the mountain. As the last hour's tramping drew to a close, and the rocks of the mountain's foothills loomed large and sharp, the sun was already warm on Rowan's back. And for some time he had managed to stay on his feet only by thinking of the buckshaw. While Jiller had been loading his pack for the journey, he had slipped away to the fields to say goodbye. He found the beast swaying anxiously in the green grass that still surrounded the muddy drinking pool. "We're going to help you," Rowan had told them, as he moved from one to the other, stroking and patting and drawing in the familiar warm animal smell of them. "Soon there will be sweet water again, and it won't be long." Last of all he had come to Star, and he put his arms around as far as they'd reach around her neck, and he laid his head on her shaggy wool. "Goodbye, Star," he had said. "Wait for me. I'll bring back the water. I will not fail you." He knew Star could not understand his words, but she grunted and snuffled to him, as if comforted just by the tone of his voice. Ned and Mother will see to you while I'm gone," he had told her. "If Dawn has her calf while I'm away, they will help her. They promised me." One final hug and he had to go, but Star's trust and strength stayed with him, even when his knees trembled with tiredness and his breath shuddered in his chest. That's exactly what a good friend can be. Sometimes when you have a friend, you don't even know how much you're leaning on them until you come to a place where it's hard in your life or you're struggling, and then you realize, wow, this is easier because I have this friend. You might not realize that at that moment even, but it is the truth. "Yo, Ellis." Strong John's shout broke into Rowan's daydream. Alun and Marley came to a stop in front of him. He stumbled to a halt and he looked up. Before him rose a cliff of rock. Beside him, the dry stream bed had become a deep round hole, still puddled with little muddy water. There was a black opening in the cliff just above the hole, and dying weeds and moss crusted over the smooth edges. So this is where the water came from. "The water usually gushes from there," Strong John was saying to Val and Ellis, pointing to the opening. "When it's running as it should, you cannot stand here without being soaked by the spray." Brandon clambered down into the empty pool and walked busily around it, kicking at the soft mud. She bent over the rock to look up into the opening in the cliff, as though hoping to find an answer there. "Sheba said the problem was at the top of the mountain," said Marley, who did not seem to be able to stop herself from being irritated by Brandon. "There's nothing to see down here." "There's no harm, I suppose, in looking for myself, Marley the Weaver," Brandon retorted. She rubbed her hand against the rock and feeling up into the hole as far as her arm would reach. A round tunnel. The bottoms and the wall and the top are polished smooth, she reported as she wiped her slimy hands on her clothes before climbing back onto the bank. "All the sharp edges have been worn away by the running water, no doubt." As one would expect. Rowan sank down on the grass. His knees would not hold him any longer. He pulled off his heavy bag and he fumbled for a drink in his bottle. "Drink a little, but not too much," Alan warned, kneeling beside him. "We do not know how long our supplies may have to last, and we may not find water on the mountain." Rowan swallowed a mouthful of warm, metallic-tasting water, and it was delicious. He could have drained that whole flask, but he forced himself to replace the cap, and as he did, tears sprang into his eyes. He was so tired, and the real journey had not even begun. So he only went hiking for 2 hours, so this kid is kind of like on the less strong side of life. 2 hours of a trail, and he's like crying already? I would wonder. The other members of the party threw down their bags and they stretched, and then one by one they flung themselves down on the grass. "The map, Rowan," urged Alan. Let us see it now, but hold on to it all the time, mind you. The coming and going of the figures upsets my stomach. Rowan took the map from his pack and he unrolled it on the grass, weighting the corners down with stones as the others gathered around. We are here, you see, said Strong John, his fingers hovering over the surface. And according to the red markings, we must start climbing at this point. The track goes past the cave from which the stream flows and continues until the mountain levels and the trees begin. Up there, and he pointed to a wavy mass of green leaves high above them. A steep climb, grunted Val. The boy will have trouble. Well, then we will have to help him, said Strong John cheerfully. Alan was puzzling over the map. What are these white patches? He asked, waving a finger over several places on the parchment. They're all beside the path, 6 of them in all. Could be that Sheba had erased something of importance to trick us? I wouldn't put anything past her, said Strong John. But after all, it is the path that's most important, and at least that is clear. Quite right, put in Brondon, stretching and yawning. It's pointless to be concerned with anything other than the task at hand. Rowan stared at the white patches on the map with growing anxiety. Why had he not noticed them before? And now that they had seen them, they jumped out at him, blank spaces, almost evenly spaced along the path, and the last of them at the very top. Blank spaces on a surface otherwise completely covered with colors and lines. What did it mean? The first space was at the point where the path entered the trees. They'd find out what it meant soon enough. Now I'm curious. We go through the forest at first, it seems, Brondon continued. A flat walk due west. That should be easy, though, of course, with the boy it will take us longer. And she sighed heavily and returned to the map. The directions are clear. Where the forest trees end, we will turn northwest and move across this lower ground. A short distance, it should not take us long to cover, and so on, up to the top. Simple. I have a compass, fortunately, and so I know do Marley and John, for we traded them together on our last trip to the coast. She turned to Val and Ellis. You should really take your turn on the market trips, my friends. So many interesting things to see and useful things to trade for. Val shrugged. The mill must be kept working, Brondon. We cannot close it down to gallivant wherever we please. But one of you could go and one could stay, suggested Alan, lazily chewing on a blade of grass and blinking up at the sky. Val went very still. That would not suit us, said Ellis flatly. It is not our way. You never go to the coast either, Alan, Marley pointed out. You always say you're far too busy. You're as bad as Val and Ellis. Brondon opened her mouth to say something, but then thought better of it. In any case, after a moment, she remarked instead, after a moment, the compasses are a marvel, and the Mars folk use them when sailing on the open sea. How much easier that will be our task for when we have landmarks to follow. We will be home by tomorrow, midday, mark my words. If it were so simple, we would not have needed to bring a map with us, Brondon. Marley leaned forward. The mountain is a dangerous place and a place to fear. You should take nothing for granted. I take nothing for granted, Marley the Weaver, as you know, except the evidence of my own eyes, snapped Brondon. And if you fear you should not be of this party, it is bad enough that we must drag this boy along, quavering in his boots. I mean shivering, like shaking in his boots. Do not forget, Brondon, that you were the one who insisted upon that, said Strong John sharply. Brondon shrugged and turned away. It would be better, said Alan mildly, if we put aside our differences. And then he sat up and he widened his eyes and he held out his hands, making them tremble violently. And if fear is the issue, I, for one, am terrified, he squeaked, and he threw himself back on the grass, wagging his head and chattering his teeth. Strong John and Marley laughed. Even Rowan managed to smile. But Val and Ellis stared silently at Alan and then at each other. Brondon snorted. Well, if Alan can be revived from his terror, I think we should begin, Marley said, pulling a thick rope from her pack. We will climb with ropes, will we not? I may feel the fear of which I am accused. I may not feel the fear of which I am accused, but I do not fancy a fall on all those rocks just the same. When food was scarce in Rin, Rowan had to climb trees, bending the leafy branches down to meet the snuffling eager mouths of the hungry bookshaw. He clung dizzy and pale even on the lowest of the branches. He had no head for heights. The climb that followed was to him the worst of nightmares. A rope attached to him, to Marley, Allen, and to the other climbers above, and to Strong John below. And when he slipped, as he did over and over again, his light body, weighed down by his pack, swung sickeningly into space as the rope allowed. The sky spun around him and the ground spun below, and his own terrified scream echoed in his ears. His ribs were crushed by the rope that saved him, and when his body swung back and forth against the rocks with a bruising thud, and then he had to climb again. This was bad enough, but worse was the fear that one of the others would prove as careless as he, and if John slipped, the weight might pull them all to their deaths on the rocks below. If one of the others slipped, even John might not be able to hold them. Sore and trembling, aching in every muscle, Rowan struggled on. When at last they dragged him over the top of the cliff, he fell to the ground, sweating and panting. The world swam red before his eyes, just a moment before he fainted. Chapter 6. The Forest. All right, kiddos. I'm going to upload this right now and go to school. Love you guys.